What's going on, everybody? This is Zach Mullins from The Grip Show, and I've had a lot of requests for technique when it comes to blob lifting. So I'm going to cover mostly just some technique stuff, some different scenarios. I'm not going to go into like programming blobs or whatever, you know what I mean? Because that depends on what the individual lifter's doing and what they got going on or what else they're working on. So I'm not going to even try to get into that side of things. But as far as hand position, body placement, you know, in relation to the blob, a lot of other stuff, I'm just going to cover a lot of little details and hopefully some stuff that'll help everybody out. So really, first thing I'm going to get into is obviously chalking, but I already did a video on chalking, so I'm going to put that up. If you know, first thing before you get started, probably make sure the surface feels okay on the blobs you're lifting and chalk them up. But I'm not going to redo any of the chalk stuff because I've already done a full video on it. We're just going to get into hand placement. So like most loading pin lifts, handle lifts, anything on a bar, really, plate pinch, anything, right? Generally, when we're in, you know, grip sport, we're going to be here, and a lot of mistakes that people will make is they will go basically dead center of the blob and they'll just squeeze here. And in reality, that's not the best way to pick it up. And there's almost like a bigger space here that you're not really controlling. So this center line is really where you want your hand to be. So although you're offset, basically by pulling this back, having the strongest part of your hand or the two strongest fingers basically splitting the blob in half. It's a general rule of thumb. There might be some different angles to it, and I'm going to bring some stuff on the screen for you so you can get a closer look too. But you're generally going to want to have your thumb, if we're here, right? You're generally going to want to have this probably slightly back. You don't really want this in the center, because if this thing moves or as you're going to lift it and it tilts, you don't want all this space in the back. It's the same thing of having like your thumb and, you know, middle of your hand in line for like a hub lift or something. So you just want everything creating that vise and kind of an even, equal pressure to where everything's balanced. And I'm going to talk about that more as we get into breaking ground with it and everything else. But yeah, so that thumb is going to kind of slightly be back, and the fingers are going to be back this way. So that is just the general hand positioning, that you should kind of be splitting the front of, you know, where your index is at. You should be almost splitting the blob in half this way and not just grabbing it in the middle or just randomly, you know, there should be some thought behind it, especially if you start getting into maximal blobs and maximal lifts. So that's very basic, just offset, centering the hand. As you go more in depth with that, you might get to the point where, you know, okay, you slide your thumb back and maybe you kind of angle the fingers a little more forward, and maybe there's a slight angle to it. And I'm going to kind of bring up more pictures so you can see what I'm explaining or what I'm doing. But that's totally possible. So everybody's going to have different hand dimensions, lengths, and all that stuff. So, and what we're lifting is going to vary or change. So you're not always going to necessarily use the exact same technique, the exact same grip on every single blob. There's some principles and some basic guidelines that, you know, are just common sense, or they will be common sense hopefully after you see this. But as you're doing this stuff, you might have to adjust on a different blobs. I did do a video for legacy blobs and compared the version 1 and version 2s. The version 2s are way taller and skinnier, and that completely changes where my hand has to be in relation to the shorter, fatter ones, which is like a Blobzilla, like of the first generation. So you're going to have to kind of do some of the work or practice that stuff, but a lot of these tips are still going to help. But yeah, you have to kind of customize it to, nobody knows your hand better than you, and, you know, nobody knows the blobs you're lifting on better than you. So for that, you have to kind of make the most of these tips as you get into this stuff. So from there, another thing that I notice a lot, and I'll just have this way, one of the things I see people mess up is just where your body is at in relation to the blob. So if it is here, I will see several people stand like this far back. and they're, I don't know, probably a foot in front of them, and they'll reach out like this. Not only does that, like, you don't have it centered with your body and everything, but you also have to reach out to it. And if I'm reaching out and trying to lift it up straight, unless I'm just so strong and this is a submaximal blob to where I pick it up and it just, oh, it's going to come back in. Like, you don't want to have this thing out in front of you to where you're reaching, because the next thing I'm going to get into is on this other side here. So same thing, I'm just showing you the right side. So, or the outside of my body. So from here, I don't want to be out like this, reaching to the blob, because as I reach out in front of me, not only does it's not a strong position, it's not the best way for you to generate tension, but if I have to reach out, it's going to be that much harder for me to kind of like keep my arm bent closer and engage my lat. So if you think that you can pick it up with a straight arm out in front of you, you're adding obstacles and levels of difficulty that aren't even there. You know what I mean? You're just creating problems for yourself. So the thing I would suggest is scoot up to where you're centered over the blob. That way you're over this thing. It might even be slightly over to whichever arm you're using. So in this case, it's my right. It might be slightly to the right side, or where I can really get over top of this thing. And from there, some of the stuff I'm going to be doing is setting my thumb like I talked about. And you can use your other hand to kind of stabilize it, keep it in the same place, walk your fingers over, and get your grip set up. But I'm not having to reach out and extend myself and like lose my tension. With this thing closer to me, it's going to allow me that once I get this grip set with the hand, I can keep a bend in my arm. It's not just completely straight. And if you straighten the arm from the very beginning, it's no different than like, hey, close the biggest gripper you can close. Nobody's going to be like, straight arm and just use their hand. If you say, hey, grab that person by the neck and crush it, you're not going to be like, oh, this is the hardest I can do. It's just your hand. Like, so you want your whole body getting into it. So you don't want to be reaching out, straight arm, all loose in your back and everything else. So when you're here, you get your grip set. You can use the offhand or not, whatever. But you're here, you set the thumb, really stretch going across, walk the fingers over. I'm not even going to get into ground breaking yet, but from here, this arm should be bent. And for me to really lock this in, I kind of will tuck my elbow. I do the same thing on inch dumbbell lifts, but I'm not only able to engage my lat back here, but I can keep this elbow. And this is going to be like the strongest position where I can engage everything, my whole body, and generate the most force, most tension. So that is just general, the blob being centered, offsetting your hand back a little bit, thumb stretch, get that web, walk over top, get your fingers set. You might have to play with the angle a little bit depending on the blob you're lifting, but you're going to be hand centered on the blob centered with your body. And you should be able to maximize the amount of power you're going to get from your back, even your bicep, generating power into your wrist to have a little bit of flexion, to take some of that weight off your thumb. So this is one of the biggest things I see people mess up. And this is one of the coolest tips I've ever picked up in regards to blob lifting. So how this came about for me was I had not only been lifting, tons of blobs and whatever. This is a few years into the sport, and I had purchased some hex, like block weights. So like a half 90 and like a half 100 or something. I might even have an 82 in there, like 80, 90, 100. But I bought them off Raymond, and we were messing around and talking about how hard these hundreds were. Because generally a half 100 block weight, about 50 pounds would be about like a half 100 York. Just the sides are flatter, and depending on the little angles of the hex weight, it's generally flat on the sides. And as long as you can get over the top, it's usually not harder. It's usually easier. But because there's not always consistency with hex weights or hex dumbbells, some of them you run into can actually be legit. And they're all legit feats of strength, and they're all good, legit lifts. But I'm saying, like, it's not like York half 100 fat man versus the other fat mans, and they're all like, yeah, they're generally the same, little bit of texture. Like the hexes don't have the same shape sometimes. So some can be really tall, have bigger slants, and it can, there's just a lot of variance there. So I was actually having trouble with a half 100 hex at the time. And this was something that I had already cleaned like 110 hexes and lifted way heavier stuff, lifted Fat Man, like 120 Legacies, like all types of stuff. And I was struggling to break this 100 off the floor. Now, it wasn't like a major goal of mine or anything. It was just some, kind of like scrap hex blocks that I had gotten to kind of collect, and they were cheap. So, but they were real tall, and it was really hard to lift. It was actually like harder than a next gen, and probably pretty comparable to a Fat Man blob. So Luke told me, and that's where I picked this tip up from, is Luke Raymond. So if you look like on a hex dumbbell or even blobs, generally there's going to be this flat spot. And basically the tip that Luke said was to take the dumbbell or the blob and kind of lean, and as you're using your flexion to break ground, aim for this front corner instead of going directly sideways. I see a lot of people do this, right? They go to break ground, they get here. Obviously, we want some wrist flexion. That's going to help take some of the pressure off the thumb. But if you go completely sideways, you're not going to be as strong. That's not the way the blob really wants to go. It's not the way that your bones and your anatomy line up. So as we get into this, you can think of it as rolling it to the front corner, or think of it as basically rolling to the front knuckle, like your index knuckle. And what that is here, as I get ready to lift this, right, I can get centered over it. It's in a good position. I can keep my arm bent. I can engage my lat. I can generate as much force as I need here. This is strong. This is not really strong. So I'm in here. And if I have to, I can even kind of push my body weight and press down, get a little bit better bite, or some people maybe stay a little higher up and walk the fingers more. It depends on your abilities and the blob you're lifting. But for this point of rolling to the index, that's how I like to think of it, or use a landmark of the front corner of the blob or hex head that you're lifting. So from here, I can use my offhand if I want, get the grip set up, and as I go to break ground, I'm not going to go fully sideways. I'm not just going to pinch it straight up on the top like this. I'm going to roll it to my index knuckle or that front corner here, and then squeeze, and then that's where it's going to come up and kind of settle in. So that's probably one of the biggest tips and one of the coolest things that Luke told me, and it made a lot of sense. And with that one little hex block weight that I was trying to lift, it made it instantly come up. And I don't know if it would have came up that particular day without that advice. So literally sometimes just the technical things that we do on compound lifts can make a big deal, make a big difference. But even on blobs and, something that's 40, 50 pounds or whatever weight you're lifting, sometimes the smallest piece of technique, especially with grip, can take you from not even breaking ground to just pulling the lift repeatedly in the same session. So I have to bring that up. So we've covered, position in relation to the blob. We've covered kind of the hand being offset back, wrist flexion, but also rolling to that index knuckle. That's what I'll stick with. That's kind of what I like to use now as my mental thing. But yeah, front corner or to that stronger part of your hand, to that index knuckle when it kind of breaks ground and kind of settles in that perfect alignment. And you'll feel it if you do it right. And it's a stronger position. It's just the way your hand is lined up. It's the way our bones are. It's the way these things are shaped. And when it goes that direction, you're going to have a stronger grip on it. I want to get into combo lifts, trying to, do combo lifts, including a blob. Now, this could be a double blob lift, which we can get into. Let me see what blob I want to use. We'll go with this. So, for combo lifts, I'll give a couple of quick tips if you're going to do a double blob lift. Could be a blob this, same size, like doing a double lift. Could be One's bigger, one's easier to lift. And where you put that could vary based on, whatever the blob is and what your goal is. So right here, I just have I have a half 90 round head and legacy. So just for these, I'm going to break down some things that you can do. So if you're trying to do a double lift and you have one blob that is just like completely maximal, and that's pretty much going to make or break the combination you're doing. I would put that blob centered, unless you can just double suitcase and have the weights outside. If you feel like your grip isn't as strong outside your body, then go back to centering over. So let's just say this is the harder one to lift, right? I can position myself in a way that I'm still treating this as if this is the only blob I'm lifting. I just have the easier blob placed out here where it's going to make sense, so that I can then, engage the same style of grips and break ground. So, and I'm going to get into some other stuff before I, fully do everything here. But that's just centering over whichever thing is the hardest to pick up. That could be, if it's double blobs, it's going to be the harder blob. If it's like incorporating an inch dumbbell, okay, maybe the inch dumbbell is what I need to focus on more than this blob, so the blob becomes secondary. So that's just a good rule of thumb for doing combos, is if you have something that you really have to focus on and it's like do or die, and you need like every ounce that you can put into that, for it to work, generally straddling it and having it centered over your body is going to give you more control, and it's going to be an easier grip. So if you are able to basically suitcase outside your body, basically a double lift out here, I would still recommend keeping these blobs kind of neutral, or maybe about 45 degrees, because that's going to kind of naturally align with, where your hand is moving, or the strongest position you can form, versus, if it's completely out or if it's turned over. I mean, I don't know, maybe somebody's stronger this way than they are here, but to me, this is harder. So generally I'm about neutral or 45 degrees with these things. So that's kind of where I'm setting up. But the point I want to make with doing a double blob lift is, if the blobs are wider and they're tougher, that's where sometimes we'll have that little, hey, I'm going to use my other hand to kind of really set up, and then I'll grab the other one. So sometimes people they'll set up on the tougher blob to lift, and then they'll go and lift the easier blob, which is perfectly fine. That makes sense. And that's the same thing as kind of straddling, straddling the tougher implement and putting the secondary one outside. So for this, a mistake that happens a lot of times is when you're here and you're trying to do a double blob lift, if you set your hand on the more difficult thing and you kind of stretch this out, if you take too long to get back to the other side, this hand will sometimes just lose its power. And everybody's going to be a little bit different, but if you screw around too long with the setup, or holding your hand out at that like extended, stretched out feeling, and it's a maximal lift, a lot of times it's not gonna it's almost like you lose snap, or you lose explosiveness. You lose that kind of that loaded up tension to kind of pop up. And I don't want to say like it's a stretch reflex type thing, but it kind of is in that same lane, where one of the biggest mistakes I would make early on with lifting a bigger blob and then an easier blob like this outside the body is I would go, try to really set up perfect on the bigger blob, and then get to the other blob that I knew I could lift. And then, you try to break ground, and usually this hand's going to stall because it's already been down there screwing around 4 or 5 seconds, completely stretched open, and it doesn't really feel the same. So I would get frustrated. I'd have trouble doing it. And some of my best double blob lifts would be more of a grab and go. So for like a grab and go, you're basically just walking up, setting the thumbs. You can kind of press down into the blob, or get the thumb set and then walk and kind of press into them. And that's going to basically take the place of having your other hand there to stabilize it. You can just push it into the ground. That helps a lot, but it also makes that, explosion off the ground, or that pop up where you really feel like you have that like just spring in your hands. That's going to make this a lot better than if you get down here and try to get the best grip you can. You could have the best setup ever, but if you sit down here for 3, 4, 5 seconds and you're screwing around getting in position, there's still a good chance that if that's a tough blob for you to lift, it's not going to come up. You just wasted too much energy, or just wasted that position. So for me, I kind of will, if you are going to set one blob first, just be quick getting to the other one. Don't stay down here too long. So this is more of a setup thing. It is partially technique, but if I'm going to set this, okay, set, I need to go. Because the longer you wait for that first one, it's going to impact the lift. It's only going to go downhill the longer you stay down there. So on a lot of these, I prefer just to grab and go. That's getting my thumb, roughly set. I'm not really, squeezing or doing anything too much. I'll kind of press down, get my grip, and just grab and go. And sometimes for doubles, that's going to work better than getting the perfect grip. Because maybe you sacrifice, 5% of not getting the perfect grip on the first one, but you're maintaining 100% of your power, versus like, oh, I'm going to make sure that the grip is so perfect. And by the time you've done all that, if you spent too much time, you could have the best grip in the world, but you're already like zapped and you start losing power. So that's something very small. It's really blob technique in general is kind of like a very obscure thing. So it's not like this is teaching somebody how to squat or bench press, right? Where there's thousands of videos. So I'm covering some real particular things, but hopefully it'll help out and you can kind of use them for, different lifts. But yeah, that's a big one, is kind of grabbing and going when it's a double blob lift, not spending too much time on that setup hand. And it doesn't matter if it's a plate pinch in the other hand, an inch dumbbell in the other hand, any type of feat. If you spend too much time with your hands stretched out like that, and you don't get to your other thing and you don't get that momentum going, a lot of times your combo lifts are going to suffer. So that's something I wanted to bring up off that. But yeah, and that 45-degree angle is really just the same thing as, kind of just aligning with the hand and the arm, being able to kind of keep this position, being able to stay strong, and basically lock this in to a point where, if I'm here, I can lock this in and it just doesn't really move. I can apply that force to the blob, versus if I am, straight arm, just squeezing here, this is almost like just doing like one of those like pony clamps or like a pinch thing. You're not even really using your body. It's just a hand thing. But yeah, generally outside the body, the 45 degrees, that's going to kind of naturally roll to that index to the front corner of the blob. And that's going to make your double lifts more successful. Same thing with combo lifts. If it was an inch dumbbell or something, I kind of like that angle. The big thing you're going to have to figure out with that stuff, though, is, where it's at in relation to your body. Because if you put it too wide and you get here, when you go to implement that flexion, if I get too far, now I'm almost out here, and it's like, it's not going to be a lateral raise, right? If anything, it's going to come back in. So you don't want that thing to start drifting or moving and not be centered. You pretty much want to, I'd rather have it closer to me. That way, when I break ground, I can basically kind of go over top of this blob, or I can engage this flexion more than, okay, I basically have to do a pinch out here and do like a shoulder fly at the same time. So I don't like doing that. And then same thing for if it's in between your legs. When you get here, if you mess around and put this blob a little too far in the center, maybe as you go to, and this is like real centered, this is the arm I'm lifting with, but it's almost, too far this way. So if I go here, maybe I can't really maintain this position as well, because the blob wants to kind of swing or slide or drift a certain direction. So it's just up to you to make sure that when you get it set, it just stays and it's in line with your whole body. Everybody's going to be a little different, but that's pretty good information, just where it's at. So paying attention where the blob's at, what your body has to do to lift it, and that's going to determine how much it's turned or how close or far or where it's at in relation to your body. That is pretty in-depth for the most part. Like I said, I'm not going into like reps and sets and anything too crazy. Some other methods I will get into just to help out will be kind of loading a blob, because these things can be expensive. They can be tough to, not only have different increments of them because they're expensive or hard to find sometimes, but if you have several blobs and you can lift one and the other one seems hopeless, how do you bridge that gap? Obviously, one of the best techniques is probably taking a band. So taking, basically a big rubber band or, like powerlifting style bands or whatever, just something to give you some sort of assistance, and wrapping that under the blob. The reason that's important is because with blobs, as they get heavier, they get wider. So if you're going up to that bigger width and it's heavier, just because you could lift 10 extra pounds on the blob below it doesn't even mean the other one will break ground, because the hand position's different. So you want to make sure that if you're trying to conquer a bigger blob, that you have your hand exposed to that width and you're used to it. That's where, okay, I have my hand on the target or goal blob, and that band is helping assist me. And then you can just adjust how high up that band is to kind of help you, hey, I need more assistance, I need less assistance. And then you can kind of get, the best bang for your buck out of that. But that's going to get your hand used to that width, and then still lifting as big of a portion of that blob as you can with a little bit of help. And as that blob leaves the ground, the band is going to help, but it's going to help less and less the higher up you lift it. And like I said, there's a lot of stuff out there for that, but I don't want to go too in depth. Other stuff you can do, and I'm going to bring some videos up. So I'll bring videos up, but I'll also use this as I'll actually use the one here. So another thing that's very kind of the old school method, that's one of my favorites I like doing. I think I got this from Jed's Lift the Blob book, or maybe I saw him doing it in videos. They're all over the place. I mean, over a decade ago. And it's just tying a shoelace over top, and then you just run your plates through it. So you just tie like a 2.5 or 5s, whatever you're doing, and you just have the plates sitting off to the side. The thing I would mention with that is if you want it to be a consistent weight where all the weight is breaking ground at the same time, make sure that the weights are tied up high enough to where everything leaves the ground at once. Or else you might get a little bit of a false sense of strength or a false sense of a PR, because if you have the weights, hanging down a couple inches, you kind of get that running start where the blob leaves the ground, then the weights kind of come up with it. So it's almost like using chains, which you could put chains on a blob. I mean, I haven't really messed with that. I put some bands on them to make it harder sometimes for certain situations. But yeah, so there's two methods for that really, in my opinion. And that's, if you want to have all the weight breaking the ground at the same time, tie the weights up higher. That way they're not, sagging on the ground and then leaving later. And then if you wanted that running start to basically, hey, I don't think I can break that much weight off the ground, but I want to, once it leaves the floor, I want to kind of see if I can hold on to it as that overload, comes up off the floor. Then tie them a little bit lower and get your, kind of running start with momentum, and try to fight that as all the weight breaks afterwards. Perfectly fine too. But that can be done with just a simple shoestring and a couple of, 2.5s, micro gains plates, or, 5-pound plates if you're, that strong on that particular blob. But that's a real easy one. So we have that. Obviously, now these are expensive and people always complain about it, but there are plate mates. These are magnets. This is like 2.5 pounds here. So from here I could either do, basically 1 1/4 up to 7.5 pounds with just this. And for a lift like this, 7 pounds is a big difference. So ways that I would load this would be, You know, just slap it on the side, put it somewhere where it's not in the way of your hand. It might fall off if you're trying to do reps. It's something you just got to plan. Or if you want to kind of balance it, maybe put this below your thumb, put this down to where it's below your fingers. Stuff I wouldn't do, very similar to hub lifts or other things where we see people kind of cheat the lift a little bit, is, you know, if you kind of front load a blob like that and you get to the point where you kind of front load it and your thumb's not really getting hit as much because this front loading and your flexion is kind of nullifying the pressure on the thumb. That could maybe give you a false sense of strength with it as well. But it's still lifting more weight in that same hand position. But yeah, I would try to stay away from front loading it. You could even do things like, if you wanted to kind of have a different, you know, loading style, you could almost try to, you know, overload the thumb so that it's offset a little bit and it kind of hits the thumb more. That's something else you can do. So really, that's the beauty of magnets, or, you know, being able to place the weight wherever you want, is you can kind of, you know, get the desired effect of, ah, man, my thumb's weak, or hey, I think this is weak. You can kind of attack different parts of your hands, and that goes for, you know, stuff beyond blobs as well. But we're doing blobs in this video, so I'm gonna stick with that. So another thing I have, which is the Mad Cow mini horn. So this is just another form of magnet. Those are the actual magnets themselves. This has magnets on the bottom, and this basically will act as loading pins where I can slide, you know, 2.5s, 5s, 1 pound plates, whatever, you know, micro loading I want to do. And I can do the same thing with positioning this. Obviously, you don't want to tilt it down. The weight's not really going to stay on that well, but as long as it's up or level, you're good to go. And you can kind of move that around. That way your hand has space to, you know, get the best grip you can and still overload it. So yeah, anything with the, you know, from shoelaces, boot strings, plate mates, which people complain they're expensive, the Mad Cow mini horns, you could, you know, snag some of those. But yeah, all really good methods for, you know, slowly loading up different increments on this blob to either, I don't know, set a PR on that width or try to bridge to the next thing. Make what you have tougher. That way when you get a bigger size blob, you're prepared when it shows up, whatever the case may be. So there's a lot of stuff there as far as loading goes. Hopefully that makes sense. But yeah, the possibilities are basically as broad as your imagination can be. So like I said, whether you're loading the thumb side to hit that a little more, whether you want to have the plates tied where they're hanging on the ground and you get a running start and kind of overload off the ground brake. Like, there's so many little things you can do there that can keep your training fresh, mix it up, and also kind of give you a better stimulus to move through these different increments or climb the ladders of, you know, lifting bigger or tougher blobs. So if you don't have a big collection full of all these increments, as long as you have a couple simple tools, you can create, you know, those same effects with what you already have probably. So that's something you're just kind of making the most of what you already have, because, you know, not everybody has a ton of blobs sitting around. So yeah, from that, you know, I really think that covers a good portion of, you know, not only how to load it, where your body's at. Like I said, there's small things in there, like going towards that index or the front corner of the blob. There's, you know, just getting your thumb to stretch a little bit, you know, that webbing, not just putting your hand on it and squeezing, but actually like stretching and kind of contouring your hand to it, getting as much surface area as you can, kind of getting basically it's like the elasticity in your hand, you know, getting that web to really kind of bite on it and kind of just latch to it. All those things will make such a big difference, because if you think about somebody that just walks up, and we've seen this on several channels where some of the biggest, strongest people in the world grab some of these things and they don't lift any more than, you know, the garage lifters, right? It's because they just have bad technique. They got all the weight, all the strength, all the hand size, and all the other stuff, and they're not able to produce a lift as good as just, you know, average Joes, basically, right? So there's a level of strength and technique to it as well. So yeah, if you think about somebody just grabbing it, however, it's like, imagine if they lined their thumb up if they put their hand across, if they got that elasticity in the thumb web to stretch, if the angle was right, if they used flexion and then rolled towards the index knuckle, if their elbow was still bent and they weren't already starting with a straight arm, if they engaged their lat, all that stuff seems like, oh yeah, whatever. But like, it's the difference between watching these dudes and that have competed in World's Strongest Man and they can like log press 400 pounds and lift 500-pound Atlas stones, and then they can't pick up a 50-pound chunk of iron because, I mean, I think that with the worst garbage technique in the world, you should still be able to lift it with that kind of strength. But it is a position that doesn't really get hit that often because it's really, you know, open hand and it's really hard on the thumb, which usually isn't getting hit in those other lifts. But it's hard to watch dudes that are some of the strongest people in the world and they can't even budge 45 to 50-pound blobs or less. And it just doesn't make sense. So like I said, even without technique, you think that they'd be able to lift it. But we've seen examples of it where, yeah, it doesn't pan out. So this is just me trying to give the best information I can. All these little things, it might seem small, but when you put them all together and then you get hundreds and hundreds and thousands of reps on it, you can just see when somebody is like doing a medley, or if they're doing a blob ladder, if they're doing different combo feats, you can just tell there's almost like a style or a comfortable, you're just being comfortable with it. It's just skill. And that skill mixed with the strength that's been built, plus the technique, when all that aligns, that is the difference between, you know, some of the best people to lift these things and, you know, maybe somebody that's getting by with other stuff, maybe somebody that's, you know, leaving 2 or 3 different blobs on the table because they could lift them, but they just aren't putting the time in. And that's just, everybody gets to train what they want to train, right? So, I mean, I'm not knocking anybody if they couldn't lift something. If they don't care about it, they don't care about it, you know. But if you want to pursue something and do it correctly and, you know, become the best or get the most out of it, you want to pay attention to little things like where you're standing. Where is it at in relation to you? Did, you know, even when you watch your own videos of your lifts, did it drift this way? Was my arm too straight? Was I too far back? And a lot of that's going to carry over to, like I said, loading pin lifts, other grip lifts that you're doing. You know, I watch people try to lift the inch dumbbell in videos and the bell's out in front of them or the bell's off to one side and it starts spinning on them and does weird stuff, you know. But that's all stuff that they're probably not thinking about in the moment, or maybe they know it and by the time they get to competition or something, they're forgetting it, you know. So it doesn't hurt to remind people that already know this stuff. And it's definitely going to be beneficial for people that don't know this stuff to hear it for the first time and try to implement it. So for right now, I'm going to go ahead and pretty much wrap up with that one. Hopefully the examples, the videos, all the pictures I'm going to have with this, do some of the stuff I was talking about. Hopefully it does it justice. And yeah, hopefully you can set some blob PRs in the next training session you get on them. And like I said, between chalking it properly and then adding some of the technique in and kind of finding your own style or maximizing what you have and getting that tension going. Yeah, I think that, or even implementing different methods, right? Implementing the methods to kind of bridge the gap to that next blob might be different than I just only deadlift these blobs. Well, clean the lighter ones, do transfers with them, start tying the stuff on them, or if it's too big, okay, do the bigger blob with the band assisted method. Like start doing other stuff to get to where you need to be instead of just kind of settling for the bare minimum of I kind of know what I'm doing, I kind of watch this, I kind of do that, and I just deadlift them. There's always more to be done with the stuff. And if you have dominated and conquered certain blobs, we'll start trying to push for things like, cleaning it, curling it, snatching it overhead, doing a blob cycle, which would be the, if you do the blob cycle, I don't want to mess up the order. There's a particular order with it. But generally, I think it's deadlift, clean, snatch, curl. Hopefully I got that in order. But that would be the blob cycle. And that's doing all of that in one go, where, deadlift it, clean it, snatch it, curl it, and basically just enough time to reset and pick it back up. But to do those in a row, that's tough to do. But that would be like complete mastery of something. So if you're just picking up stuff and you don't have that like insane power to clean it, or there's just more that can be done. So if your goal is just to deadlift a really big blob, that's cool. But like most things I've preached about on the channel or most lifts I've talked about, if you really want to get into being different or setting yourself apart, the more you can do with it, the more you can, you know, that starts opening up things like maybe I'll probably put some videos up here, but you know, like inch dumbbell lift, but then clean a blob in the other hand. That's stuff that like people don't even understand how hard it is to lift some of this stuff, let alone lift 2 of these. Or, okay, not only am I going to lift 2 of these, I'm going to clean both at the same time. Like just putting something in your other hand, I don't care what it is, that already magnifies the feat itself. It's so much harder doing combo lifts than a single object that you can really center over and put all your effort towards. So when you start doing stuff like, you know, lifting super heavy dumbbells and then maybe doing like a, you know, hub clean, or you start doing a blob clean and a curl in the other hand with something, like when you start doing that kind of stuff, that's where I feel like you really start upping the level. I'm all for the big blob lifts and that's fine. But for me, I'm always kind of the type of person that's what's next, what's next, what's next. So for me, it's always looking for that new ground. You know, oh, can I transfer it and then lift this? Can I, you know, so that's where my head goes with this stuff. So that's just something to not only do as like a feats of strength thing or a combo thing, but basically also, you know, those are just straight up methods that you could use to improve your blob lifting. So, you know, yeah, that might be something that you add in to make a combo better or raise the bar with a certain feat, but it could also be the thing that gets you from deadlifting this blob to deadlifting the next blob. You know what I mean? Like, so, you know, just the kind of that overdrive of cleaning it, or the transfer of just catching it in that dynamic, like just hard squeeze where you have to just stop it in midair. All that stuff's going to be better than just deadlifting the smaller blob or, you know, screwing around with stuff, wasting your time. So hopefully this information helps. Hopefully you chalk up next blob session and set a PR. And if not, just keep sticking with it, keep chipping away. Sometimes, you know, the wide pinch stuff, sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. You got to kind of feel it and train it, you know, on and off. People that have done a lot of blob lifting will know what I'm talking about, where, you know, some days you're on fire and other days it's like, man, I don't even want to put my hands on that thing. It's not even going to move. So those are just some ideas, but yeah, those are some very, you know, it's basic technique, but if I went and pulled up 100 random videos from people that I watch lift blobs online, I guarantee most people aren't going to do all of them. You know what I mean? So that's why I'm putting out stuff like this, is because, yeah, okay, you got 5 out of 7 tips right. Well, what happens if you do the other 2? You know what I mean? You'd lift better. So I watch some of the best people in the sport, you know, still forget things or get a little complacent with what they're doing, or, you know, not really staying sharp or as sharp as they could be. So from beginner introduction level, you're just starting off, this is going to matter and help out. And if you've been doing this for a while, you know, I watch other people lift all the time. And if they do something right, I'm like, oh man, yeah, it's a good reminder for me. I need to get back on that, you know. So it's never going to hurt for experienced people to basically, you know, kind of refresh their minds with this stuff and put it to use, because you want it to be automatic. You don't want to have to think about it. You don't want it to be a checklist that you have to like do. You want it just to be part of what you do and you grab and go. But yeah, I'll quit rambling because I can go on a tangent with some of this stuff here. But yeah, best of luck in your blob training. If anybody has questions below, anything that you think I left out, like I said, I didn't cover all programming, every single way to train a blob. The video would be, you know, 10 days long. I'm not doing that. So for what it is, you know, body positioning, hand placement, you know, the way you're creating tension, you know, where you're at, threw in a little bit of the double blob lifts, combo lifts, just some little tips and stuff there that, you know, you can pick up the more you get experienced, and you'll feel it as you train and do it. But yeah, so that's kind of where I'm going with this one. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. But if you do feel like something was left out, you know, mention that in the comments, and yeah, let me know. Or if you have any questions, I'll answer it the best I can. And if I can, I'll send you to somebody that I think could help. You know what I mean? Because there's always situations that someone maybe knows better than you do, or better than I do. So in that case, that's when I would, you know, refer somebody to a lifter that's more their style, or somebody that has a similar hand to them, or, you know what I mean? There's a lot of different stuff that goes on there. So yeah, it's not always one size fits all. So, yep, that's going to be it for this one. And thank everybody for watching. And like I said, comment below. Let me know what blobs you're lifting. What's the biggest blob you've lifted? What's your goal blob? Whatever. Anything in the comments, fair game. Comment and do whatever. But yeah, hopefully this helps. And I'll see you on the next one. Thank you.